So the news has sort of gone under the radar a bit that Derek Chisora has signed with Sauerland. Derek Chisora's had 2 combat fights since his loss to Tyson Fury. The first one he won in like 10 seconds. The second one was a fight against Marcelo Nascimento, where he looked absolutely terrible, to be honest. He won easily, but he went 10 rounds, he went to points, and he really looked very, very poor. You know, I've got fond memories of that fight myself, because I had a suspicion Nascimento would take him the distance, and I'd actually bet Derek Chisora to win on points at 9-1. So, I've got a slight fond memory there, but there you go. Anyway, he signed with Sauerland Events. So as we know, Frank Warren's let him go. Frank Warren, well, it's unclear. Frank Warren and Queensbury Promotions released a statement saying that they're no longer working with Derek Chisora. Whose decision that was is not immediately obvious, but having looked into it somewhat, it appears that maybe that decision was more on the Warren side than Chisora's side. Now, the fact he signed with Sauerland is interesting. You know, as we know, Sauerland have recently signed 2 other relatively highly profile UK fighters in George Groves and David Price. And I think there's 3 ways they can use Derek Chisora. So I'm keen to detail what I believe the 3 ways are, and then really to kind of hear your thoughts on how he's going to be used. I mean, Chisora's been on the scene for a long time, but he's actually relatively young for the heavyweight division. I believe he's about 32 years old. So if he got himself into shape, he's potentially able to have another crack at it. And whilst it's become clear that Derek Chisora fails at the top level when he fights elite fighters, I certainly think Derek Chisora is a good enough fighter to win Commonwealth titles, European titles, and to defend them. You know, I think there's some big fights out there for Derek Chisora. I'd like to see Chisora, Lucas Brown, and against that level of an opponent, you know, I think he's an interesting fighter. Maybe even like Chisora, Tepa. So the first way Sauerland could use him is actually do what they did with David Price, which is try and build him up and try and, you know, give him 4 or 5 warm-up fights and then put him in a title fight. You actually do like a classic promoter's job on him. Now, Derek Chisora has come back a few times. I know when he lost to David Hay, you know, he had 3 or 4 sort of comeback fights for Kevin Johnson, Edmund Gerber, Malik Scott, and they could take him along that route again, you know, with a view to trying to build him back up. And it is likely that an on-song Chisora could beat that level of opponent once more. To me, I'm sceptical. I'm sceptical if, given the fact that Sauerland have seen Chisora lose multiple times, more than David Price, and given the fact that they've had the experience of David Price and probably wasted some money there, I'm sceptical whether they're going to want to do that with Derek Chisora. So whilst it is a legitimate option to kind of go back to the drawing board and start him off again against sort of journeyman opponents and build him back up, I'm not sure that's the end game. Option number 2 would be to get him to fight amongst their stable of heavyweights. I mean, Derek Chisora, David Price is still an interesting fight. It's still an interesting fight. And, you know, it is possible that you could do that for some sort of Commonwealth title or something like that. For what it's worth, I actually make that quite a tight fight. I'd almost edge to Del Boy as the favourite there, but David Price can really punch. If he could keep Chisora at range, which is a big if, he could maybe outbox Chisora. Obviously, the question is, David Price, you know, he doesn't like being stifled, he doesn't like the pressure being put on him, and could he live with Chisora's style? I'm not sure. Do Sauerland still promote Pulev? I think they might promote Kubrat Pulev. You know, Pulev Chisora is potentially an interesting fight as well. So, option 1 is building back up. Option 2 is try and get some fights with him amongst their stable. You know, Chisora Price is a sellable fight. Chisora Pulev is a sellable fight. Finally, and what I fear is the most likely, as we know, the Sauerlands do a lot of business with Eddie Hearn. We've just had Paul Smith and Martin Murray fight Arthur Abraham. We know that Eddie Hearn and Kalle Sauerland get along very, very well indeed. We know that they're doing business together with George Groves, and there's more to come. I think Sauerland were in big talks with Eddie Hearn to get the David Price-Joshua fight until Price got chittened by Tepa. And I think they want to have another crack at that with Derek Chisora. And from Eddie Hearn's perspective, I view Chisora as a less risky opponent for Joshua than Price. And that's because styles make fights. Because as I've just said, I'd almost pick Chisora to beat Price. But I think Joshua has an easier time with Chisora than he does Price. For two reasons. One, Chisora is a lot smaller. Joshua would have a substantial reach advantage over Chisora. And two, Chisora doesn't hit as hard as David Price. You know, David Price, he's a limited fighter. But if he hits you, he can knock you out. And especially with a fighter who's untested, who's never been hit on the chin before, as Anthony Joshua, you don't want that as David Price. So I'm thinking either Sauerland's signing Chisora, trying to get some fight of that nature. You know, that's very possible. That is very possible, because after Joshua supposedly beats Dillian White, I mean, we'll come to that in a separate video over the next few weeks, but if Joshua walks through Dillian White like he's expected to, where do they take him next? A lot of people are saying Erkan Tepe. I still think Joshua's a fight or two away from Erkan Tepe. And I don't think Eddie Hearn's going to gamble him. I don't think he's going to rush him. You know, time's on their side. Time is on their side. So it's interesting. But don't rule out Chisora Joshua, especially now that the Sauerlands are involved. So that's the third route, and that's the route that I think is the most likely. Let me know your thoughts on this. Are you interested in it at all? And what do you think the game plan is here? Thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed this, do give me the thumbs up. I'd appreciate it. Many thanks.